today. My name is Jessica, and I'm a helicopter flight instructor, a medevac pilot, and utility pilot. And this webinar is designed to be interactive. So, like she said, it's really important that we have good, succinct answers because otherwise we're just not going to have time to cover everything. But we really want to get through all the scenarios, and it's very much based on audience participation. So that makes it more valuable for everyone. But it has to be done really well. So I pulled a bunch of scenarios from the Aviation Safety Reporting System. All of the scenarios were non-fatal, and in fact, only one involved any injury at all. And this is very unique because we actually know what the pilot was thinking, unlike a fatal accident where we're trying to recreate or figure it out from the future going into the past. So I can't take credit for this particular layout. This was stolen with permission from Brian Schiff. Many of you might know Brian Schiff. He has a wonderful show called The Schiff Show, a name that I love. And I saw him do this, what would you have done type presentation on a NAFI, National Association of Flight Instructors Mentor Live. And I contacted him because I thought it was such an awesome idea and asked if I could adapt it for helicopters. And he said, yep, steal away, just give me a shout out. So a shout out to Brian. And if you aren't familiar with his series, it's wonderful. He does a really great job, and he's a 20,000 hour pilot or something, and really does a great job putting together valuable webinars for people. So I know the audience here is primarily fixed wing, but the objective is to put yourself in the position of a helicopter pilot. And a lot of the scenarios, because it's ADM based, that applies to all pilots. So try to put yourself in that position. And I chose scenarios and can describe things so that you don't have to be a helicopter person. You don't have to know all the things. Although that intro video did help. Thank you, Laura, for that. And we can use the group's responses to form some of these decision-making ideas and get creative about what the pilot would have done. We don't always have all of the information about the scenarios, so no time really to ask questions. I put in all the pertinent stuff into the scenario, and I don't really have any other information. So don't ask questions so much around the scenarios because I don't have the answers probably. So we just have to do our best with the information that the pilot submitted voluntarily in the report. So again, helicopter specific events, but ADM is applicable to everyone. So I tried to make the information digestible, and I can pepper in some helicopter specific stuff if needed. As always, it's never our intention here to judge the pilot or any of the people involved or berate them. This is just about learning and thinking outside the box and being creative about solutions of these fairly complicated situations. Quick review of the directions that Laura already mentioned. We want concise, succinct responses in the Q&A box, and then she'll clear it in between. So apologies in advance if we don't get to everyone's, but the poll questions will help to organize some of the more common answers. And then if you have something additional beyond that is where you can put that into the Q&A. Any other more general questions you can save until the very end of the presentation. We'll have about 10 minutes to address those. So this is the first one. I tried to come up with some creative names for each of these scenarios. Maintenance mayhem. This is a Bell 407, just like in the picture. And the aircraft came from a maintenance facility. There was a throttle cable that was replaced. Pilot does the pre-flight and noticed that the linkage in the throttle cable was kind of unusual, something different that he hadn't seen before. It was a little awkward. He asked the mechanic, and the mechanic said, "Oh, it's good here. It's within limitations, and here's the procedures that we followed." And the pilot is thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure that that looks quite right." But his next job is to fly it to the base. This, I believe, is a medevac base. So, what would you have done in this scenario? Laura's going to bring up that first poll question with some more common answers, three things that are likely, right? Refuse to fly the aircraft, maybe make a phone call, get another opinion from a pilot or mechanic or a manager. Um, that, trust the mechanic. Hey, they said it was cool. Show me the procedure. Yep, I'm going to go ahead and fly it. Or something else. If you have another creative answer here, something that's a little outside of the box, this is where you can put it into the Q&A. So we'll give a couple minutes. Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. We'll give a couple minutes for those poll questions to come through, or answers rather to come through, and then go into the Q&A as well.
So I'm going to
See
end
what
our
we got.
poll in five,
Okay, great.
4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to share the results. So
Okay.
19% of us would refuse to fly it.
Mm-hmm.
70% would get another pilot or mechanic's opinion. 3% would trust that it was okay and fly it. And now I'm going to look in our question box. A
Mm-hmm.
couple of people said do a test flight with another with the mechanic on board.
Uh-huh.
A couple
Nice.
people, yeah, a couple people said do a near ground test, short flight, hover over at the airport, but at a safe altitude to test the cable. And that was kind of what the most people said
Mm-hmm.
is do a short flight, like a post maintenance flight, and stay close to the airport. And then a
Mm-hmm.
couple people suggested talk to previous pilots, see if they've had trouble. Um, and then look and see if there's any photos available to compare to see what it looks like previously.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks everyone. These were really nice, short, succinct questions. One included have the mechanic give you a lesson and show how the attachment works and the rigging and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Absolutely.
we're good to move on. And
Okay, yeah, great answers, everyone. Thanks. This is awesome. So a lot of really good options here. What this pilot ended up doing is flying. So he went ahead and flew it to the base, landed. Everything was okay with the flight, nothing went wrong. And a different mechanic who happened to be at the base saw the cable and expressed concerns about how it was rigged. The pilot at that point wrote up the discrepancy in the engineering report aircraft logbook. And then, after some discussion with that mechanic, decided to recheck the routing of the cable, which was incorrect. So it wasn't done properly, but it flew all right anyway, maybe by a stroke of luck. And the result, the overarching result, or how this ended up coming to pass with the company, is the company changed some procedures for returning aircraft to service after maintenance, whether that be a test flight, like a lot of you mentioned as a great idea, and making sure that there's managerial support either from a director of maintenance or somebody in the maintenance department or an operational manager in the within the flight division of this particular company, and changing how they support a pilot who is coming up with some concerns about the maintenance that was performed. So again, non-fatal, nothing happened, there's no accident really, but a great decision-making scenario for how we can change and what options you might have as a pilot in this particular scenario that can apply to everybody. It doesn't have to be helicopters. So great job, everyone, for that first one and the participation in the Q&A. Let's keep it rolling. So another interesting one, this is a forced landing in a Robinson R-44. The main rotor temperature light which is a main rotor gearbox oil light. So when the gearbox oil gets too hot in these helicopters, it'll come up with a yellow or amber caution light on the panel. And this pilot happened to be flying over pretty rugged terrain, not awesome landing choices for this scenario. The emergency procedure for this helicopter is to land as soon as practicable. So not land immediately, not as soon as possible, as soon as practicable. And the closest spot for this pilot to go was in a wilderness area. Landings are prohibited in a wilderness area. So he can physically land there because the helicopter can land anywhere, but he has this prohibition over the wilderness area. Because it's a land as soon as practicable emergency procedure, he could also continue. That's the other option. It's not a land immediately thing. He could go beyond the wilderness area and find another spot to land. Let's bring up that poll question.
all right, I'm going to launch our poll question. And here are our choices. Land immediately in the wilderness area, even though it's prohibited. B, wilderness areas are not practical. Continue to another more appropriate spot. Fly it back to a base where there may be a mechanic available. and then something in the question box. And so I will let those roll in and I will end our poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to end it. Here's our results. 31% would land immediately in the wilderness area. 46% would move to a more appropriate landing spot. 19% would fly back to base. And now we've got our something else. Um, People are saying continue until landing is definitely needed. They're saying fly to the closest strip with a mechanic. Um, Check for secondary indicators.
Hmm?
Continue to monitor the temp and land as if it gets higher. Um, and then land, let it cool, and test again. A couple people are saying, you know, just do the safe thing. Better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Nice.
Yeah, there were a couple along those lines. So
Yeah.
with that, I will stop our share and you can continue on.
All right, super. Yeah, these are great answers. It depends. And it does. There's a couple of these are like, well, I'm not sure. How far is it to the next landing site? Or do I have another way to monitor this light? Unfortunately, in the Robinson, there's just the light that comes up on the warning panel. There isn't a gauge. There's a gauge for oil, engine oil pressure, but not for gearbox oil pressure and temperature. So that really is all you have. And who knows, the light could be malfunctioning. There's just so many options, right, in these scenarios. But great job, everybody, coming up with these creative ideas. And this pilot decided to land in the wilderness area. And because you have the option to break an FAA rule in an emergency, this happened to be a remote area, so not maybe not a scenario where the pilot's going to officially declare an emergency on ATC, but you could pretty easily explain away that violation. Oh, I had this warning on my panel and I needed a place to land. That's why I decided to land in this illegal wilderness area. So that's what this pilot decided to do, shut down the aircraft, checked all the relevant systems for this particular aircraft, and then let it cool down. A lot of you said that. Let it cool down, restart the helicopter, recheck the indicators. There weren't any further indications of temperature issues. So instead of continuing on that particular mission, the pilot decided to just return to base and ask the mechanic. The mechanic was available for consult about that issue. So mechanic inspected the aircraft, didn't there it wasn't reported whether or not there was actually an issue or if it was a light malfunction. It didn't say specifically, but did commend the pilot on making the precautionary landing. And yeah, probably would have too. You know, utilizing that helicopter's ability to land in almost any spot is a conservative option and a great way to go. And you could, yes, you're going to be chatting with the FAA about that. However, like a few of you said, it'd be better to chat with them than to talk to their family about something worse that happened with that particular aircraft. So nice job. Really loving these answers. Next one, frightening firearms. This is a really fascinating scenario. So a pilot has it's an EC-130 is a very common tour helicopter. And this pilot had a helicopter full of passengers about to go on a scenic flight. And as they were repositioning from the company helipad to the departure pad in this fairly major airport, which had some fairly strict departure procedures, there happened to be a prisoner transport aircraft on the ramp, which isn't unusual for the airfield, but it's rare that the anyone from the transport aircraft is going to engage with or have contact with anyone in the tour passenger realm of the airport. However, pilot hovered over to the departure pad, was ready to follow their clearance procedures with ATC and get on the way with the tour. Two men in plain clothes approach a helicopter with an assault rifle pointed at the helicopter. So pilot's at the departure pad in a hover, ready to leave, talking to ATC, and has AR-15s pointed at his helicopter, making gestures towards the helicopter. What would you have done in this scenario? You can go ahead and launch that poll.
So for this poll, our choices are fly away, hover taxi back to the more secluded company pad where there may be some additional resources, and hold the position or hold the position at departure pad, call ATC and ask for help or something else. And so I will end this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and share the results. 9% of us would 9% of us would fly away. 18% of us would hover taxi back to the company pad. 70% would hold position at the departure pad and call ATC for help. And then let's take a look at what's in our question box. Um, uh, People are saying query the tower, comply with the folks with the guns, do whatever they say.
Pull
Um,
out my own AR-15. That's funny.
there's some super funny things in here, like pull
Nice.
out my own AR-15 or use the cannon. So yeah, that's some of our questions. And
These folks in this case wouldn't have had contact with the people with the guns, so the pilot didn't know what they were trying to indicate. Like, are you trying to make me land? Are you trying to make me go away? Are you indicating that I should fly away? The pilot had no idea, and there's no way to communicate with the people with the guns, which is a problem in this case. Knock him down with the rotor wash. These are pretty funny. Even the smart aleck ones, you guys. Thank you. This is funny. Um, so we'll go to the next slide here in a second and see what the pilot actually did. But I want to address this question here from John about the inclusion of iPhone satellite messaging and personal locator beacon and that kind of thing useful in remote wilderness areas or for assistance. And for sure, that is an absolutely valuable resource. If that's not something that you carry now on board with you, then consider it. An inReach device, a messenger, something if you're flying, especially if you're flying in backcountry or remote areas, that is an invaluable resource to have with you. So I just want to bring that up as a safety topic. And questions like that, you guys can also save them to the very end of the scenario. So if I see them, I'll address them live. But if your question like that, that's applicable to multiple things, doesn't get answered, then just save it to the end and we'll be sure to address some of those later. So yeah, nice job on these. Here's what this pilot did. So concerned for the safety of the passengers and not really knowing what these people with the guns wanted, the pilot decided to back the helicopter away and go back to the company pad rather than the departure pad and set the helicopter down, parked it facing the men rather than turning the tail or turning away from the people with the guns. And the pilot kept the helicopter running, contacted ATC, and requested to have police be sent to that location. Pilot stayed at the controls. It was at ground idle running, didn't get out until the police arrived, and then was able to shut down, offload the passengers now that the police were present. The marshals with the guns never addressed or talked to the pilot. They refused to speak with the pilot. So the pilot never knew what they wanted or why they were doing that. But the police were able to de-escalate the situation and everyone went their separate ways and it was all okay. Passengers were able to continue on their tour. So, yeah, pretty fascinating scenario and very unusual. And also a little weird that the pilot never really understood what was going on, and why they were pointing guns at his helicopter. So, yeah, very odd. But nice job with that scenario as well. Loving the answers that come through. So keep it rolling. This next one, stranded above stratus. I think a lot of us can relate to this, whether it's airplane or helicopter. This pilot was on going to a remote site is about 80 miles, so about an hour of flight time. Weather's clear, VFR aircraft, instrument rated pilot, which is a bit relevant for this one. He needed about 26 gallons, had about double that on board, and the aircraft burns about 26 gallons an hour. So the intended flight time is about an hour. He has about 2 hours of fuel on board. On departure, goes through a broken layer and is in cruise flight at 1,500 feet. The broken layer all of a sudden becomes overcast. And as a rule for helicopters, a regulation, helicopters have to maintain visual contact with the ground. If you are not instrument certified in an instrument certified aircraft, you have to maintain visual contact with the ground so that you can land. So the pilot no longer could do that and said, "Ooh, okay, weather's changing. I'm just gonna spin around, go back to base." But once he turned around, noticed that the overcast layer was now completely widespread and couldn't get down below in a below that broken layer because the broken was now overcast. So he's pretty stuck above this overcast layer. Pilot's about 40 minutes into flight at this point, so still has about an hour or so, hour and change of fuel, hour plus VFR reserve. Basically, we require 20 minutes in helicopters for VFR reserve fuel and day and night. And he decided to, well, you'll see what he decided to do, but he's got about an hour of fuel left. Go ahead and launch that poll.
So here's our poll. And questions are, and can you see the poll, guys?
Not yet.
Let me make sure. There we go. This should work. Can you guys see it now?
I do not have
Let me
it.
try something here.
No, people are not seeing the poll.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Let
It
me,
should work now, Laura. You should be able to share.
okay. I hit launch and it still is not launching.
Hmm. Well,
Let,
here, I can, if you all want to just, we can do this ad hoc here. The answer, the poll options are to declare an emergency and descend through the clouds. That's A. Continue flight, actively looking for a place to descend safely through a break in the clouds. That's B. C. Descend through the clouds without declaring an emergency and maybe communicating with ATC. Or D is something else. So A, declare an emergency and descend. B, continue flight, actively looking for a place to descend. C, descend without declaring an emergency. So if you can would like to vote, you can put that in the Q&A and then your succinct answer if you have something else that you would do in this scenario.
so I'm seeing kind of 50% between A and B. And then let's see, a lot of people are saying contact ATC and ask for help, ask for
Mm-hmm.
radar vectors to an area of VMC,
Mm-hmm.
get weather and divert.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that, and also asking ATC for the nearest VFR airport.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a good one: climb, conserve, um,
Yep.
communicate, and comply.
Nice. Yeah, great. All good answers. Yeah, seems like declaring emergency and descending is probably the overarching thing. Asking ATC, overarching decision. Yep, absolutely. I'd agree with all those. And we'll move on to what this pilot actually did. So, pilot, check the weather again. So, again, he's got time, right? This isn't a low fuel emergency. This is a potential IMC emergency. So, he's seeing that, rechecking the weather, takes his time, noted continuing deterioration of conditions, all of which was unforecast. So decided to look at fuel burn. Starting to become a concern. I can't just fly around forever looking for a hole in the clouds. So contacted ATC, declared an emergency. Especially being a non-instrument rated pilot, I feel like that's the more conservative option. He has ATC with vectors or as backup if he does get into a pilot disorientation type scenario. He's already on with the frequency and has that resource to help him out. So that's what he decided to do, declared an emergency, has ATC, requested to descend through the overcast layer, which thankfully for him was pretty short. It wasn't a really thick layer. He was able to get down relatively easily through that thinner overcast layer without becoming disoriented. So successfully descended down, breaking out at about 1,000 ATL, went back to base and landed without any other issues. So nice work. Sounds like we're all pretty much on the same page with that one and what to do. Calling ETC, they always have your back. So no harm, no foul in and using that resource, even if it's an emergency. I would much rather deal with that paperwork or whatever resulting from that emergency than a- any of the other alternatives. So good work. This one is an electrical failure in an A star. This is an older model of A star. And the tour flight, 6 passengers, so it's pretty full for this aircraft out of a towered airport. First sign of trouble is a CD player quit, which does put a date stamp on this particular aircraft and how old it might be. We did CD players in a helicopter. And then his radio and transponder quit. And that's important. So this pilot has no way to communicate and no way to declare an emergency with your transponder or do 7600 with a transponder. No cautions or warnings on the panel. So typically with a failure like this, you might see a battery light, a generator light, some sort of indicator on your panel, but possibly the electrical failure also shorted out components of the light and warning system. So pilot didn't really know what was going on. There were no lights and warnings, just lost these really important things while flying around with a bunch of passengers. So voltmeter goes down. What are your options here?
And here we've got the electrical failure poll. Choices are land immediately, follow electrical procedure failure, electrical failure procedure, setting, shedding things, etc. Return to base, watching for traffic, or something else in the QA box, Q&A box. I will end our poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here are our results. 24% of us would land immediately. 53% would follow the electrical failure procedure. 21% would return to base. And now I'm going to look at our question box. A lot of people are saying reset alternator, check alternator, pull out a backup radio and request return to base. Um, I kind of like use some choice words and land wherever there's a road. Uh, so those are kind of the things that are coming in.
Hmm.
And also land at a non-controlled airport, squawk 7600 is another
Hmm.
suggestion.
Awesome. Yeah, nice work. Couple of fuel quantity, like we don't really know, but you can assume he had enough to complete the tour. So maybe 45 minutes or something of fuel. Yeah, declaring emergency, no Spotify on board. Yeah, nice. Cell phone to call ATC, awesome. That's a good one. Way to think outside again, using the resources. You might have handheld radio, backup handheld radio, especially for the time, right? Given it's older aircraft, probably older, the older accident. So yeah, backup handheld. Um, awesome. These are really, really great checklist looking at the emergency procedures, following the emergency procedure, which in helicopters, for those of you who aren't aware, are often memorized. So we don't have time in an emergency procedure in a helicopter to grab a checklist. Most of your emergency procedures are memorized. Occasionally you might, and this might be a situation where you would have time because the aircraft is clearly still flying. But a lot of the time in helicopters, all those checklists are 100% memorized because you just don't have the time to grab your checklist. So watch for fires. Yeah, awesome. These are really, really great answers. Let's see what this pilot did. So the pilot followed essentially an emergency procedure for electrical failure, which is shedding all the consumers and seeing if you can bring it back by getting rid of things like the lights and air conditioning that aren't needed right then and there, maybe reset the generator. So he did follow some of those procedures, then contacted dispatch via the cell phone. And someone said that in the comments is using your cell phone. It's a resource that is often forgotten about. And it's a reason I've heard enough of these stories now. It's a primary reason that I keep my cell phone in a pocket on me so I can grab it if I needed it in flight. And the pilot didn't have ATC on this phone, but did have the company dispatch number. So called the dispatch center for the company and asked them to coordinate with ATC because he didn't have the tower frequency or tower phone number stored in the phone, but did have his dispatch company dispatch number. So with that coordination via the dispatch, tower was able to give him a light gun signal and landed back at the airport without any further problems. Passengers were offloaded. Pilot just flew it right over to the maintenance hangar, which is very short distance away. Like, don't need to re-enter a pattern or anything. Just a hop over some buildings to get to the maintenance hangar. And maintenance discovered it was the starter generator that had failed. But when the report was submitted, no one could figure out why there was no caution light. Typically, with a starter generator failure, you're going to see a generator light on the panel, and that did not happen in this case. So when they submitted the report, we don't know why that wasn't the case for this scenario. But great job. I think landing in this case was another great takeaway or something that utilizes the capabilities of the helicopter. You can land and make a phone call rather than trying to make a call while you're flying. But otherwise, pretty good decision making here. And thanks again for your contributions. This is one of my favorites. This is a fairly recent accident. It happened a couple years ago. And in the picture for non-helicopter folks in the audience, this lays out what a helicopter cockpit for this model, Robinson R44, looks like. So you have the cyclic control in the pilot's right hand, which is directional control like a joystick. The collective control down in the left hand, that's primary for lift generation, up and down motion. And that's important for this scenario. So there's a nighttime tour, two passengers. Pilot picks up to hover and is on, I believe, a ramp. It didn't really specify, but that's what I'm picturing here. It's on a ramp with plenty of space, not a runway. Picks up to hover, starts to move forward to gain speed for takeoff. In this helicopter, the takeoff procedure is to stay pretty low in ground effect, which is below about 20 feet. Stay low in ground effect to about 45 knots, and then the equivalent of rotate and gain lift from there. So at about 25 knots, so the pilot's maybe halfway through that takeoff profile, the door, the front door on the right side, on the pilot side, swings open. A gust of wind blows off the pilot's hat, headset, and headlamp and blows the door open. That bottom side note there, ETL is effective translational lift, and that is a aerodynamic condition all helicopters go through around that 20, 25 knot speed, and the helicopter outruns its own dirty downwash. So everything becomes more efficient, less power is required to continue to move forward. And that's probably in that transition. There's some aerodynamic stuff going on that's probably contributing to why the door opened in the first place. But it's also a very critical phase of flight because you're still close to the ground. And the pilot can't really let go of that right hand control during any phase of flight, but in particular, low to the ground during takeoff. So the pilot can't let go. And that's important for this scenario. So think through that when you're coming up with your potential answers here, that it's not an option to let go of the right hand and close the door, which is on the right side. So keep that in mind, and we can release the poll questions.
All right, I'm launching this poll, and the choices are A, try to close the door right away, B, land, C, position the helicopter so the wind blows the door closed, and then try to close it in flight, and then something else in our question box.
And a little side note with C, so we take off into the wind just like planes do. So the thought process there is you could turn the helicopter and have the wind help you blow the door closed. And that might assist in this scenario. It's pretty challenging one. It's not a great situation to be in.
Yeah, no kidding. So I'm going to end our poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's our results. 1% would try and close the door right away. 80% of us would land. 16% would position the helicopter so the wind blows the door closed and then try and close it in flight. Oh, we sure can't do that in an airplane. And then let's go to our question box. Um, one person said there was just a bonanza report of a crash where the pilot was distracted by
Yeah.
the open door. Um, ask passengers to close the door. A lot of people are suggesting that. A lot of people.
Yeah, so the passenger cannot access the pilot door. Passengers have their own doors for the back seats. So the passengers don't have access to the pilot's door. So the only way to get this thing closed is for the pilot to do it or somebody to do it from the outside of the aircraft. And then open door is a training item for helicopters. No, not officially. I personally train for doors off flying and for a scenario like this, but no, it's not an official training item. Should be, but it's not. Let's see what else. Yeah, passengers, no can do in this particular one. Autopilot, there's no autopilot on this aircraft. On most helicopters, especially small, there are no autopilot options there. Maintain control, turn and return to land for sure. Continue takeoff, maybe try to deal with it in flight. Continue climb beyond ETL and then try to close the door. I don't do options, land smoothly straight ahead. Landing is absolutely an option. This pilot hadn't committed really to the takeoff yet. It's about halfway through the takeoff profile. So could have continued to fly rather, could have chosen to land because you've got the choice there. Gain altitude speed. Yep. Awesome.
I like key,
Good.
do not panic.
Yes. Do not panic for sure. Yeah, nice work. Land to the side. Yeah, key, do not panic. Absolutely. Left knee on collective, left hand on left hand holds cyclic, right hand closes door. That is an option. It's sometimes challenging in a takeoff profile to be messing around with what hands doing what on the controls. But another thing, it's not a training item, but I personally teach it in the late private or commercial level to swap hands and have the cyclic control, which is normally in the right hand, be left hand for stuff like this, adjusting your radio, making a phone call, closing the door, that kind of thing. So, yep, that's a good idea. Yeah, way to get creative, thinking outside the box. Awesome. Let's see. I forgot the pretty picture here. Sorry. It's a
Oh,
good
that
picture.
is pretty. Oh.
Yeah. So we'll skip through here about what this pilot did. So this pilot decided to let go of the collective. Again, that's in the left hand, reach over across the body and across that right hand to try to grab the door with the right hand. So the pilot's doing this. Super awkward. Unfortunately, that movement elicited a right roll because he's reaching across body to try to grab the door. So rolled the helicopter to the right. And because he was low level in this takeoff profile, still within ground effect, that right roll caused the right skid to catch. And this is classic dynamic rollover, which is a common helicopter accident, unfortunately. Any sort of rolling moment with thrust in that direction, the helicopter is going to catch a skid and roll. So that's exactly what happened here. Thankfully, he wasn't going very fast. It did cause significant damage to the fuselage. The blades contacted the ground. Helicopter's more or less totaled. But the pilot walked away without injuries. Passengers had minor injuries. This is the only scenario that we sustained any injuries, and could have been a lot worse, right? In this case. So he chose to reach across his body, listening that roll, crash the helicopter. I like y'all's answers about landing or continue maintaining control. Fly the aircraft, aviate, navigate, communicate, folks. Right? Basics. So fly the aircraft. Nice work on this one. I love your answers. All right, I'm gonna check in on time here. This is one of the ones we might skip. We're good. 8:41.
Good.
Okay, so
We're
this one's a
really
little
good.
bit longer and a little bit more complicated. So this is a long cross-country flight from north to south across a really, really remote region of Alaska. If you're familiar with Alaska, this is North Slope, like Prudhoe Bay type area, way north, all the way down to Anchorage. This is across the entire state of Alaska in a single day. Very limited fuel, especially in that northern region of Alaska. There are virtually no airports, no fuel stops. So you fill up at the top and then you have to make it a certain distance before there's an opportunity for fuel. So a lot of planning around that, especially with weather. There is one place to get fuel before crossing this mountain range. The fuel stop, the ideal fuel stop, and really the only one involving an airport is on the other side of this mountain range. But there's one place that you can fill up out of a barrel. This is a 50-gallon like fuel drum storage area at this dinky little strip. And there's a pretty good chance that the fuel is either not going to be available, it's going to be contaminated, you're not going to get the pump to work, there's going to be something funny. So 50-50 chance you're going to actually get that fuel, but you could stop. If you stop and you can't get fuel, then you probably don't have enough to make it across the mountains. So you're now north of this mountain range, and I have a map here on the next slide. I'll bring it up in a moment. So you're north of this mountain range. The weather is starting to deteriorate, and it's going to continue to deteriorate. And the pilot's trying to get across the mountain range to the fuel place and to drop some equipment at this airport. So I'm going to bring up this map here. So just to kind of draw your attention to that map. There's an inter-route decision point, and that's north of the mountain range. Two options to get across these mountains. One is the blue line, which is a higher pass. So you need higher altitude and therefore better cloud clearances to get over that pass. But it's a direct route to where this pilot's trying to go, which is that actual destination little tag there on the other side of the mountains is Brooks Range in Alaska. And that little airport's called Coldfoot. The other option with deteriorating weather is the lower altitude pass, which is the red line. And the pilot does not have enough fuel to be able to try the higher altitude pass, the direct route, shorter distance, and then circle back if it doesn't work out and go to lower altitude pass. So this is a pretty critical decision. And it's important to note here that this is almost bordering on an emergency situation because you don't have fuel options. And the pilot knows that it's going to be pretty tight going into this already. And then we're adding this pressure of deteriorating weather and adding the pressure of increasing distance on that red pathway on the lower pass. So you have a higher pass, direct line, lower pass, the red line, which is less direct. Fuel's going to be tighter, but a better guarantee for weather. The red line, the lower pass option, also delays the whole trip. So there's a little bit of pressure about that because the pilot needs to then circle back to the intended destination on the blue line to drop off equipment. So there's a little bit of time pressure around that too. So what would you have done in this scenario, Laura?
All right, here we go. Um, A, try for the higher pass and land if fuel becomes an issue. B, commit to the lower pass and accept delays and inconvenience. C, retreat to the alternative fuel and hope it works, at least you're on the ground. And then something else. I'm going to end our poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to share our results. So 6% of us would try for the higher pass, 71% would commit to the lower pass, 18% would retreat to the alternative fuel and hope it works, at least you're on the ground. And then let's see what our question box has to say.
And Laura, I'll read these ones because I know a little more about this scenario. I might be
Sure.
able to address a couple of things. So there, ATC is no help in this area because there aren't any ATC facilities. There's no towered airports in this particular region of Alaska. So it's a drag because normally I would say absolutely ATC is always going to be there, always going to have your back. In this particular scenario, they are not a help with the fuel situation, which is unfortunate. Um, Return to base, can't get there today, delaying the flight. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of those. It's no go for me. You can, yeah, some places you can land, not necessarily resources at these places, like it might be stuck overnight or this is not a place where you can like get a hotel and chill. Um, so if you do choose to land and wait out the weather, you're gonna be sleeping in a helicopter and it's gonna be pretty cold, but at least you're on the ground and safe, right? Return to departure point, potential option on the back to the base by the North Slope. Discontinue, don't go, delay, cancel. Yeah, awesome. These are really great. Um, there are more options than what is listed. Yeah, feel free to put them in. I mean, we're looking for people with that kind of knowledge. Alaska is a very unique flying environment. So if you do have experience in Alaska, I'd encourage you to chip in with your knowledge because it is a place where a lot of flight lessons have been learned. Certainly for me. Land at the airport with questionable fuel and C, yep, for sure. Carry fuel drum, land at pad, return to base, don't go. Yeah, yeah, awesome.
I
Coldfoot
kind of,
Camp
yeah, that's the one I like. Coldfoot Camp has hotel and food.
has hotel and food. Yep, but you have to get across the mountains to be there, right? So you still have to
Yeah.
commit one way or another to going across the mountains in deteriorating weather at Coldfoot. But that was the final destination. Ideally, is getting to Coldfoot, but that's on the other side of the Brooks Range. So hence the dilemma. Yeah, really nice answers, everyone. So we will see what this pilot did. They opted, knowing that we have a limited fuel, but probably going to make it with a lower altitude pass. And this lower altitude pass was pretty broad. It's one of those big U-shaped valleys, so a lot of places to land if you do get into trouble or get into a low fuel situation. So pilot opted to take that lower altitude pass, even though it was a little bit out of the way. Fuel was pretty tight, but did make it, landing options available, and then backtracked to Coldfoot to pick up the equipment after putting some fuel on board. And the pilot, who is me, was really, really happy that there wasn't a strong headwind to make the fuel situation any worse. So again, worked out fine, but pretty tough and also a tough, near emergency situation because the options for retreat, there actually wasn't enough fuel to be able to get back to base in this case. So there was that alternate fuel that was the 50-50 shot. That was an option, or landing and not risking running out of fuel, regardless of what pathway through the mountains was chosen. There's always an option to land, even if it's inconvenient, even if it means you sleep in the helicopter, at least you're getting on the ground and alive. So I want to be extra clear here that I'm not saying that it's a great idea for you to push fuel and weather. That's not the take home message. The take home message is to utilize the helicopter's capabilities and land anywhere. And if you can't, then retreat to a place where you can get on the ground safely, and reassess your options or delay the flight to begin with, right? It's always okay to stay on the ground and wait for a better day to fly. Nice job, everybody. All right, this is our last scenario, and then we'll move towards some questions here. Torque turmoil. This is an AW109 helicopter. The pilot noticed an over torque on a patient transport. This is a medevac flight, but thought it was within limits, so didn't check the display screen. And on most helicopters that are, have an advanced glass cockpit style thing, the parameters for the engine are on this display screen. And if you have an exceedance, the screen will tell you that at shutdown that you've had some sort of parameter, whether it's torque or N1 or temperature or something that's been exceeded. So the pilot noticed an overtorque, but didn't see anything on the screen at shutdown. Doesn't mean it wasn't there, but didn't notice. Then flies again. So second flight, the pilot again didn't notice anything on the display screen because he was rushing to get through the start sequence and was monitoring the start, which is an important thing to pay attention to on a turbine helicopter. But it rushed through the display screen, didn't see anything if it was there. Flew to pick up the patient, loads up the patient, loads up med crew, getting ready to start up again. The display screen is saying that there's an exceedance. Again, supposedly that display screen with the exceedance was there the previous flight, and the pilot just didn't notice. We aren't sure, but that's theoretically what's going on here. Sees the exceedance, checks the specifics of this overtorque, which was 109% for 1 second. Pilot looks at the limitations for the aircraft, which is up to 107% for 6 seconds and 110% max. So this was indeed an exceedance beyond the limitations of the aircraft. What would you have done in this scenario?
And before we move on with that, one of our attendees is wondering if you could explain what over torque is.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so over torque happens when the pilot is pulling more power. It's a power indicator in a helicopter. So if the pilot's raising collective, asking for more lift, the engine and the torque is actually measured off the oil pressure in most helicopters. And so it will determine how much force is being placed on the engine. And that limitation, there's going to be like a transient zone where if you are in a power limited situation, like a takeoff at max gross weight or high density altitude, something like that, there's a little window where you can exceed it for a certain number of seconds, a certain amount of time. And if you do exceed it outside of those limitations of the engine and torque parameters, then that will show up on the display screen. So this is a power output measurement of the engine. It usually happens when there's a high gross weight situation, which medevac typically is. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the question.
So with that, I will launch our poll question. So would you shut the aircraft down right away and call maintenance? Would you keep the aircraft running and contact maintenance to discuss options? C, since patient and crew are loaded and one flight was already conducted with the exceedance, continue this flight and deal with it later, or something else succinct. And we'll end this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's our results. 40% of us would shut the aircraft down right away. 47% of us would keep it running and contact dispatch. 11% would say keep going since the crew is loaded and one flight was already conducted. And let's go to our question box.
There's one here that I will answer live. The requirements for further flight if an overtorque event has occurred. So the flight manual will specify on your exact helicopter, but if there has been an exceedance and it is outside of the limitations and not that transient limitation, which is kind of okay, then yeah, by regulation, especially in a Part 135 transport type situation, helicopter air ambulance, that would be a regulation violation.
All right.
Is there a time limit for 110? I think I'll go through these, Laura, because there might be some more specific questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a time limit for 110? Not that was reported. I don't know this particular helicopter very well, but it wasn't in the report if there was a time limit. Yeah, for fixed pilots, you compare torque to manifold pressure. Thank you, Jean. That's a good relationship. Yeah, reset, recheck, discuss with maintenance. So most people are saying don't accept. Some were saying continue, the max over torque was not exceeded. There was an exceedance, but not over to the max, right? And there's some gray area here. And there's also pressure. It's really important to note the pressure because the pilot had already flown, which I'm not saying is a good idea, that you should just do it because you got away with it before. That's not the take-home message. But there is a little bit of gray area with pressure because there's everybody's on board. You've got the helicopters running, you've got patients, you've got med crew, there's pressure, somebody's dying. You got to transport them. There's absolutely external pressure here, which is really important to note. Contact somebody, ask what to do. Awesome. Um, and yeah, thanks, David, for that feedback. 2, 3 more seconds to respond. Check over torque. Yep. Call for another EMS helicopter. No reason to fly. Awesome. Yeah, these are great. Um, and what is max? Max is maximum for Ken there. So any similar maintenance history on aircraft. So those are all things that the pilot would need to call and find out if there's any similar maintenance history. If the orbiter didn't exceed 110, why is it an issue? Well, because it did exceed the 107. So that is technically an exceedance. But for me, I feel like there's not a lot of clarity in the 107 versus 110. One has a time limit, one doesn't. That seems confusing to me. And maybe some clarity with a phone call. Could we look in the maintenance manual and tell me exactly what it says so I have some context for this particular exceedance because it's not very clear. And that happens sometimes where it's not crystal clear what's needs to happen or what has happened. Um, yeah, perfect. Medevac helicopters crash frequently. It's probably better to offload everyone and ensure safety. Can we take that patient via ground or get another asset, another flying asset around to respond and you can keep the helicopter running, keep all the pumps and the oxygen, everything's needed to keep somebody alive in a medevac scenario and wait for another helicopter to come. Yep.
It's
Um,
interesting. I've had experience on the other side being the medical provider up in Ely, which is a very it's up in the Boundary Waters, very few medical options. And that was
mhm,
a lot of the choices I had to make for my patients, knowing full well that, I've got a critical patient. Do I go by air? Do I go by ground? And as a pilot slash nurse anesthetist, I could say, yeah, the weather's great. We can go by air, but there's always the contingency that there might be a maintenance issue or a problem. So
mhm.
it's a really interesting consideration when you can work both sides of the story.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And I like Dave's comment here, do not consider the patient condition when evaluating safety of flight. That is 100% a medevac thing with pilots. We don't even get patient information when we're making the decision to fly. They don't allow us to gather that information. Sometimes it slips out, I can overhear a med crew talking or whatever, but it's really important for pilots to completely detach from the type of patient, the type of condition in order to keep your ADM right here in the moment with weather and maintenance and things that's in your lane. Like you stay in the pilot lane, let the med crew do their job and not combine those, not let that influence your decisions. That's awesome. Yeah, great answers. Yeah, thanks. And there is a gray area. Yeah, I'm seeing those comments. So yeah, way to think through that one. It's kind of tough because there's some gray area, there's some pressure, there's
Mhm.
that's a multifaceted scenario. So this pilot decided to fly the transport mission. So the patient was on board even after the exceedance was noted and then landed. Patient transport was complete, landed and thought, oh, I don't feel great about that decision. And I wished I had gotten confirmation or some sort of release, somebody else to call. And if you're questioning a decision, you can maybe call your maintenance professional, you can call your operational control center, call somebody, and then have their backup to reinforce your decision. If you're like, I'm pretty sure it's cool, can you check on that for me? If it's not, then I would like to know that now and do that check before continuing the flight. And then recognize that pressure that I mentioned before of having the patient crew, which encouraged them to keep flying. So again, everything was okay. There wasn't an accident here, but it was the pilot thinking, "Ugh, something's not right in my gut, and could I have done that differently?" And yeah, there are a lot of options as you all dictated through the Q&A that there were some options. You could stay on the ground, you can make a phone call, and get some support, get some backup there for this particular scenario. So that's the end of our scenarios. And as we move through just two slides here with some takeaways about aeronautical decision making, and this is a good time if your question about a particular scenario or ADM in general was not addressed throughout the scenarios, put that in the Q&A now as we go through these. And in particular, we're taking away patterns. So, what are some of the patterns that we've seen from these scenarios, and how could we apply that to our future flying, our future scenarios? We can utilize the helicopter's unique ability. So, unless you fly maybe a Cub and you can land almost anywhere, this is more of a helicopter specific thing, but it all wraps into decision making. And you do have the choice to land an airplane. You have a lot more time than you do in a helicopter sometimes. So, utilizing that unique ability, Land and Live is for non-helicopter people, it's a campaign from Vertical Aviation International, used to be Helicopter Association International, and a particular man, Matt Zuccaro, who launched this campaign like land the damn helicopter, people. Utilize that capability because it can really save lives, whether it be a maintenance thing or a weather thing or anything, a passenger issue. Put the thing on the ground rather than continuing to push a risky flight. And then listen to your gut. So if something doesn't seem right, like the pilot we just talked about with the torque issue, something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. So in his case, he regretted leaving the ground. And in some other pilot's case, maybe they didn't leave the ground because something didn't seem right. It probably isn't. So find some alternatives, stay on the ground. It's okay to stay on the ground. It's not, doesn't necessarily mean that you're saying no to the flight because no is so cut and dry. But hey, how about later? Do we have some alternatives? Can I get you ground transport? Can we wait for weather for an hour and see how things shape up and reassess? Take that time that you need to correct the issue, wait for better weather, whatever the case, before you are launching, before you accept that flight. And the power of pressure, so many external pressures that we deal with on a daily basis as maintenance professionals and as pilots. Don't let it get the best of you. We have to learn to acknowledge, recognize that pressure is a factor and compartmentalize, separate that out, and keep our decision making sound with our staying in our lane, right? Like I was just talking about the med crew scenario. Don't let that pressure of whatever the patient condition is influence your decision, whatever the weather's doing, whatever the time pressure is, the operational pressure. There's so many things we have to separate. And a lot of these scenarios would involve, if we continued or continue to write the story of these scenarios, involved pretty challenging conversations with whether it be your passengers, there were a couple tour scenarios with your dispatch center and operational control manager, ATC. So, how can we handle those conversations with more grace, more empathy, more confidence? I think that's a missing skill with a lot of pilots. It doesn't matter what you fly, but we all end up communicating. That's a huge component of aviation is communicating, whether it be with ATC or somebody in the company, our passengers, our friends, setting really clear expectations of the flight well ahead of time and managing those expectations all the way through and having good, clear, and timely communication all the way through that scenario, that flight. And what I would recommend to have more effective communications, especially when it's involves conflict or it's a challenging conversation, is to educate yourself on empathetic listening, compassionate communication, conflict resolution. And these are skills that are absolutely 100% valuable, but often overlooked and never really taught. When we go through pilot school, we're not addressing these skills, but they're so important for when we get into the operational environment. Private pilot, commercial pilot makes no difference. You're going to be dealing with these skills, and we're never taught any of these things in school. So learn how to interpret, express, and control your own emotions, your emotional well-being, which can then assist you in relating to others. So if you can notice, for example, let's say you are dealing with someone, a challenging customer, and that person is triggering a memory, something that happened to you, a bad boss that you had, a traumatic experience that you had. If you can recognize that that person's triggering you in a particular way, then it'll help you compartmentalize that and then be able to turn around and relate to them in a different way. So if you can recognize your own emotions and keep them in check, then you might be able to communicate with them more effectively and learn how to relate to them in a different way. Thankfully, Vertical Aviation International is overarching, it's like the AOPA of helicopters essentially. And they are working towards a campaign. So Land and Live was a stay on the ground type campaign. And this new campaign called It's Okay to Stay is one related to options, resources, empowering pilots to stay on the ground when that's the appropriate thing. So arming them with some resources to have those challenging conversations and empowering them to say it's all right to stay on the ground. We're not going to fly right now. Here are some other options, how to have those conversations. So even if you're not a helicopter person, these resources will be available on the VAI website. We have our big conference coming up in about a month, Verticon, and it will be available, the It's Okay to Stay landing page soon, right around Verticon. So keep an eye out for that in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And some of these resources for emotional intelligence, compassionate communication will be available to empower people to make informed decisions about whether or not to fly. And that is the end of my presentation. We do have a few minutes extra for questions if some of those are up. So let's pick through some of those here.
And while we're doing that, I'm going to give you guys a once in a lifetime opportunity to raise your hand, but just hang on. If you are a helicopter pilot, raise your hand. Everybody else, sit on your hands. If you're a helicopter pilot, raise your hands. We want to see how many of you are helicopter pilots. So
Cool.
we can do
Yeah, I like that.
questions while people are chiming in. I see a
Yeah,
lot
that's
of
great.
comments on being proactive with conversation. Feeling rushed is a huge red flag.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um,
For
John's
sure.
wondering what breaks if you have an over torque issue.
Nothing really breaks because the helicopter is designed to take more than the limitations would indicate. So it's not like the transmission is going to shear off or something if you over torque, but the engine has limitations. If you're familiar with derating of engines and horsepower, it's kind of like that. The limitations are there to protect the components so the pilot can stay well within the limitations of the engine, and there's plenty of margin for error. So usually with an over torque or an overspeed on a rotor system or something like that, there's an algorithm that it goes into the maintenance manual. They do an inspection, confirm that everything's cool, and you're released to fly. That's probably what happens 80% of the time. And then every once in a while in the inspection, oh, it looks like we blew an O-ring and we have to replace it, or there's something minor, but nothing really breaks typically. That's a good question. FAA Dirty Dozen, yeah, that's a great resource for people, human factors issues. Absolutely. Feeling rushed. Yep. These are really great.
So,
And you're welcome.
so
No,
the
that's
answer,
not my GB one.
but is that your dog?
Nope. No dogs. I travel too much. It
So
seems
the
the hardest thing to teach a pilot is how not to fly. Absolutely, Kenneth. Thanks for that comment. For sure.
So the answer to our hand raising question, 0.04% of our attendees fly helicopters.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that hand raise. That was a good exercise. Does one sell their soul to flycopters, forever leaving? Well, I don't know, Kirk, because I was never a fixed wing person to begin with, so I don't know where you'd put me into that category. Um, Contrary to some popular belief, you don't need to fly fixed wing in order to go to helicopter. You can go straight helicopter for those who might not know that. Gyrocopters, awesome. Yeah, I don't have a lot of information about gyrocopters besides what they make you learn for the FAA ground test, the knowledge test. There's some gyrocopter questions in there. Do you see any questions that we missed here
Um,
about?
there was someone who wondered if you ever found out about the fuel quality at the Alaska destination. Was it
Oh. Yeah, I didn't. I did not. It's one of those things, it's just out there. It's a literally a 50-gallon barrel in the middle of nowhere, and you like fly up. We carry fuel pumps and a little nozzle with us on the aircraft for situations like that. And I did not know if I don't know if it was going to be a viable fuel option or not. But yeah, very well could not have been. Um, hard to say. Yeah, is it again, very tough situation. USHST, thanks, Chris. Yeah, USHST is a great resource. And in time with this It's Okay to Stay campaign, it's in partnership with VAI and USHST. Awesome. Redhead stepchild. Yep. Any other questions I'm missing? I'm filtering through a lot. Thank you for your participation. This is really, really great. Um,
Yeah,
who would
I'm
fill that 50-gallon tank up to begin with? Yeah, again, with the fuel. That is usually dropped out there by companies who are operating in remote Alaska environments. It's usually taken out there by long line. So a helicopter with a long line and a 50-gallon drum that just drops it there and has it available for somebody in the backcountries in need of fuel. Any
no,
others? Lori, do you see anything else?
I don't see anything else. No, I don't really see anything else. A lot of people just saying they really enjoyed it and learned a lot, which I agree with. I thought this was super, super fun and I learned and I enjoyed as well.
Yeah, awesome. This is a different thing. We don't often have audience participation, especially I think the top I saw was about 1.3 thousand people, 1,300 people on the webinar at the top. We'll get the numbers officially later, but pretty awesome that we can have this kind of interaction that's still valuable and organized and bring in 1,000 people's experience in aviation to help everyone learn. This is all about learning. And yeah, pretty awesome. You are absolutely welcome to email me a contact. I think Laura, we've done that before where or you just gave me the questions afterwards, unanswered
I'll send you the
questions.
questions afterwards.
Perfect. Yeah. So if there are other questions that didn't get addressed, then I'm happy to address those. I do look at all of these things afterwards and can circle back and address any of the ones that got missed. So I'm sorry if we missed some live. It's always nice to answer them live so everybody can learn, but I'll poke through the questions after and address any that are burning via email.
And
So
I just
awesome,
popped
awesome.
I sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let everyone know I popped your email address into the chat box, so
Perfect.
everyone should be able to see that.
Yeah. Yep. Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, please copy that, take a screenshot, whatever you need to do. And I'm happy to send you resources that are on there to follow up with VAI stuff at any sort of promotional things or any questions that you have. Please email me. More than happy to talk helicopters all day. So
And then as
thank you,
well,
everyone.
if you don't have Jessica's email address or can't remember it or whatever, you can always send me your questions using the link in your invite for my email address, and I can forward them to Jessica for you.
Perfect.
So that way, we'll make sure that everyone's questions get to you. And
Hmm.
talk helicopters.
Yeah, you can talk helicopters. Lance, I instruct in mostly Colorado, but I do travel to instruct. I have a bunch of different side hustles. So I've got the area ambulance thing, got utility thing, got instruction. I'm based in Colorado, but can travel and I do advanced training, like full down auto rotations, long line, mountain. I don't do primary training, but advanced training for sure for people that are already helicopter pilots. And yeah, email there, Jeremy, for you, how you get in touch in Colorado. Email is in the chat. So yeah. And oh yeah, happy Valentine's Day. It's Valentine's Day. Happy Singles Awareness Day.
And I've got my Valentine. She's right back here on the couch, my little Missy. She gave
Yeah.
mommy a new in reach for Valentine's Day, Christmas, etc. So yay, Missy.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks, Laura, for everything that you do and everyone else behind the scenes for the Copy and Link series. Always a great time and so many lovely takeaways from these presentations. So appreciate the feedback, everybody. Again, email me. Happy to talk helicopters anytime and provide you resources if that's what you're going for and feedback. So this is also a a practice run of sorts for an in-person version of this webinar that's happening at Verticon. If you happen to be going to the AI Verticon this year, you can participate in person in a month. And so feedback that you have, totally open to that. So we can tweak and change, make it as valuable as possible. Really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. And I'd love to hear your feedback, hear your questions, and what else you want from helicopter people for these series. If you have ideas of other presentations that I or other helicopter people can do, we're happy to do it. We love talking helicopters. We love educating people. We love hearing your feedback and learning from you as a fixed wing and helicopter and gyroplane and all the things. So the audience is awesome and varied, and we can all learn from each other. So thanks again, everyone.
And thanks everyone for attending. This has been such a fun webinar to do and to learn from. So everyone, thanks so much for attending. See you all next week. Fly safe. Have a great week. And remember, you can always go around. Bye, everybody. Bye, Jessica. Thank you.